Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling, well, a really fundamental aspect of how we all experience the world. It shapes our lives, global events, this basic human tendency to divide things up into friend and enemy.
Exactly. And our main source for digging into this is a fascinating report called The AI View on Affiliation and Antagonism. It pulls together insights from all over psychology, sociology, biology, history. It's really trying to get a handle on this friend-enemy split from lots of angles.
Right. And our goal here isn't to drown you in academic jargon. We want to pull out the core ideas from this report, where this dichotomy comes from, how it affects us, and why it still matters so much today. Sort of the key takeaways without getting overwhelmed. Okay, so let's start unpacking it. At its heart, what do we actually mean by friend and enemy?
Well, the report lays out some helpful definitions.
Yeah.
From a psychological standpoint, friendship. It's seen as voluntary, it's reciprocal, there's mutual affection, genuine care for the other person's well-being. Think trust, empathy, honesty, loyalty, dependability.
The good stuff.
Exactly. Shared experiences, meeting needs, being able to open up, emotional support, all that. It's the bedrock of positive connection.
Okay, that feels pretty intuitive for friendship. So flipping the coin, what makes someone an enemy?
Enmity, on the other hand, is really marked by antagonism, hostility, and this underlying perception of threat. You often see feelings like hatred, malice, fear, and just a profound lack of trust. A key concept the report brings up is othering.
Othering, yeah. We hear that a lot. It's basically about making the other side seem totally different, alien almost.
Precisely. Seeing the enemy as fundamentally different from you and your group, and often loading them up with negative traits. It's a core part of how enmity works psychologically.
So it's not just disagreement, it's seeing them as inherently bad or dangerous.
Exactly. And the report looks at the psychological roots both states. Friendship, as we said, is built on trust and empathy. Those are pretty much absent when it comes to enmity. Instead, fear and perceiving a threat are central. They fire up the brain's threat response systems. But interestingly, the report notes that fear can sometimes push us towards finding friends, for reassurance, for safety.
So that threat feeling doesn't always just isolate us. It can actually drive connection too. What else is going on psychologically?
Well, tribalism is huge. Our tendency to form groups and identify with them, this us versus them thing, seems deeply ingrained. We naturally lean towards loyalty within our own group, our friends, our allies, and often view outsiders with suspicion, maybe even hostility.
Right, the in-group, out-group dynamic.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is the report points out that having a common enemy, or even creating one, can actually make an in-group feel stronger, more cohesive.
That sounds a bit counterintuitive, but
Yeah,
I can see how facing a shared danger could bring people together. Okay, so that's the individual level. What about the bigger picture, the sociological drivers? How do our societies push these friend-enemy lines?
Well, group identity isn't just personal. Think about things like nationality, ethnicity, religion, political parties, social class. These big social structures create massive in-groups and out-groups, and they naturally channel who we feel affiliated with and who we might see as antagonistic.
Absolutely. National pride or political divisions, those can create really strong feelings, both positive and negative.
And the report brings in conflict theory here. It suggests that when resources aren't shared equally, you get this built-in competition between dominant groups and subordinate ones. This can create ongoing conflict and, well, systemic enmity. People in power might act to keep their advantage, which can suppress others and breed resentment and hostility.
So it's not always just personal feelings. The structure of society itself can kind of bake in these divisions.
It really can. And social norms matter too. In friendships, we have norms about reciprocity, returning favors and loyalty. Break those norms and a friendship can fall apart, maybe even turn into enmity. On the flip side, labeling someone an enemy can be a powerful way to enforce social control within your own group.
Like saying, don't be like them, a way to keep people in line. That's kind of chilling. And the report stresses how subjective this enemy label really is.
Yes, that's a crucial point. The perception of threat, projecting negative stuff onto others, it's often more about the perceiver's own psychology, or maybe what their group needs socially, like that cohesion we talked about.
Yeah.
Because it's so subjective and changeable, the idea of the enemy becomes a tool that can be manipulated. Think propaganda, political rhetoric.
Yeah, unfortunately, we see that play out all the time. The report included a table, right, summarizing the differences. What stood out there?
It's quite neat. It contrasts the foundations. Friendship built on affection and trust, enmity on antagonism and threat. The core emotions are different. Liking, empathy for friends, hatred, anger, fear for enemies, motivation too. concern and support versus harm or defense, and how you see the other person, valued individual versus dangerous threat.
Okay, that paints a very clear contrast. So where did these deep-seated tendencies even come from? The report dives into the evolutionary roots, right? Both cooperation and conflict.
It does. The fact that both friendship and enmity are pretty much universal suggests they go way back in our evolutionary past. We see cooperation and conflict in lots of animals, and how humans express them has definitely been shaped by natural selection. The report highlights a few key evolutionary ideas.
Like kin selection, is that one?
That's a big one. Kin selection explains why we tend to be altruistic, helpful towards our genetic relatives. The basic idea, often called Hamilton's rule, is that helping your relatives survive and reproduce helps pass on the genes you share with them. So it makes evolutionary sense. This gives us a biological basis for strong family bonds, which often look a lot like friendships.
Right. Looking out for family makes sense from a gene's point of view. But what about friends we're not related to? How does evolution explain that?
That brings us to reciprocal altruism, basically the you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours idea. Cooperation between unrelated folks can evolve if there's a decent chance the favor will be returned later. This needs some cognitive abilities, though you need to recognize individuals, remember who did what.
And spot the freeloaders.
Exactly. Detect and maybe punish the cheaters who take but don't give back. This system allows for trust-based relationships beyond kin, forming the basis for friendships built on mutual benefit and expectation, like partnerships, alliances within a group.
So being cooperative can pay off evolutionarily as long as it's likely to be reciprocated. What about group selection? That sounds a bit more controversial sometimes.
It is a bit more debated, but the report mentions it. The idea is that competition between groups might favor groups that are more cooperative internally. A group that works well together might outcompete or defend better against other groups. Plus, our ability for culture is huge here. We develop and pass on social norms, rules, institutions that can push cooperation way beyond just kin or direct reciprocity.
So culture can kind of build on top of our biology, maybe even nudge it in different directions.
To some extent, yes. Though the report also notes these evolutionary pressures likely favored cooperation, mainly within specific groups, kin, reciprocal partners. Widespread, indiscriminate kindness to total strangers isn't as easily explained by these basic models, which kind of helps understand why in-group preference feels so natural, unfortunately.
That makes sense. Our evolutionary programming might have set certain defaults. Okay, let's switch gears a bit to the brain itself. What's happening neurologically when we form bonds or when we feel threatened and maybe develop enmity?
Oh, the neurobiology is fascinating. Social bonding, making, and keeping friends involves key neuropeptides. You've probably heard of oxytocin.
The love hormone or something?
Sort of, yeah. It seems especially important in females for bonding, trust, empathy. Another one, arginine vasopressin, seems more prominent in males, linked to pair bonding, but also defending that bond, which can involve aggression. And then there's the dopamine system, the brain's reward circuit. Positive social interactions trigger it, which reinforces those bonds, makes us want more.
So our brains literally reward us for connecting with people. Makes sense. What about the flip side? Threat perception, aggression, enmity.
That involves different, though connected brain areas. The amygdala is crucial for detecting threats, processing fear, kicking off quick responses, including aggression. But then you have the prefrontal cortex, the more rational part of the brain up front. It's supposed to regulate those primal emotional responses, allow for considered action, put the brakes on impulsive aggression.
Supposed to.
Right. An imbalance like a hyperactive amygdala and an underactive prefrontal cortex is linked to more reactive aggression. Neurotransmitters play a role too. Serotonin generally inhibits aggression, while hormones like testosterone can increase it. And interestingly, problems with the oxytocin system have also been linked to more aggression, not just less bonding.
Wow. So it sounds like the same basic brain systems might be involved in both bonding and aggression, just configured differently depending on the situation.
That's a really key takeaway from the report. It's not like there are separate friend circuits and enemy circuits. Our behavior, whether it's affiliation or antagonism, comes from this complex dance between these shared systems. And that dance is influenced by everything: the context, our past experiences, our genes. The brain's got the hardware for both.
Okay, so we've got the psychology, the sociology, the biology. Now, how has this friend-enemy dynamic actually shown up in history? The report talks about a historical tapestry, right?
Yes. And while friendship and enmity seem universal, how they're expressed, defined, how important they are, that varies hugely across cultures and times. Western ideas often stress individual choice, intimacy. In more collectivist cultures, maybe it's more about social harmony, duty, group ties. Even who counts as a friend can differ. You also see things like formalized friendships, ritual kinship, alongside really bitter, long-standing enmities.
So culture really shapes these basic categories, and the report links this directly to alliances and warfare throughout history.
Absolutely. So many alliances were built on the enemy of my enemy is my friend idea.
Right.
Think about coalitions against Louis XIV or Napoleon, the WWI alliances, the Allies versus the active WWII, NATO versus the Warsaw Pact, classic examples. But alliances can also form around shared values or interests, like the Entente Cordiale between Britain and France.
Right.
And history shows these things can shift dramatically. Look at the U.S. and Japan after WWII, or France and Germany now. These friend-enemy lines aren't set in stone. But when they exist, they have a massive impact on politics, stability.
Clearly, and warfare seems like the ultimate expression of this us versus them divide.
It really is, often fueled by demonizing the enemy. Nationalism, for example, often needs an external other to create internal unity. The report mentions all sorts of conflicts driven by this tribal wars, conquests like the Mongols, ideological battles like the Cold War, resource wars. It's a constant theme. And that paradox again.
Yeah.
An external enemy can strengthen internal bonds, even if it's unity built on opposition.
That weird, twisted logic of needing an enemy for cohesion. The report also mentioned the idea of the enemy itself changing over time.
Yeah, it suggests the concept evolved. Maybe early on it was more symbolic, ritualistic.
Yeah.
Then, as societies grew, enemies became obstacles to resources, targets for exploitation. More recently, especially with big ideologies, you get what the report calls absolute enmity, where the enemy isn't just an opponent, they're dehumanized, seen as pure evil, and the goal becomes their total destruction, often justified by some universal claim. That's a really dangerous shift.
A truly disturbing development. And throughout all this, the report keeps coming back to resource scarcity as a major driver, right?
Yes, consistently. Competition for land, water, food, minerals. It's been a root cause of conflict forever. Think Easter Island's collapse, Rwanda, Darfur's, Syria, historical migrations. Controlling resources fuels wars. Technology might help sometimes, but with population growth, climate change, resource competition is likely to get worse, potentially fueling more us versus them thinking.
So it's not always high-minded ideology. Often it's just a fight for basic survival needs. Finally, how has this friend-enemy stuff shaped our social rules and legal systems?
Well, social norms, the unwritten rules, definitely reflect it. Friendship norms stress loyalty, trust, reciprocity. Break them, you face consequences. Maybe the friendship ends, becomes enmity. Enmity shapes norms, too. Rules about how you treat enemies. Just defining who is a friend and who's an enemy reinforces society's values.
It's like drawing lines in the sand about who belongs and who doesn't. And legally, politically.
Diplomacy is basically managing amity and enmity between states. International law, like the Geneva Conventions, tries to regulate conflict, set rules even for dealing with enemies. Just war theory tries to figure out the ethics of it. When is war okay? How should you fight? And then you have thinkers like Carl Schmitt, who argued the friend-enemy distinction is the absolute core of politics, defining who's in charge, what the state is.
Wow. So this simple-seeming split, friend, enemy, it echoes through almost everything in our individual and collective lives. This really has been a deep dive.
It really has. And hopefully understanding this dynamic gives you, the listener, a useful lens for looking at current events, navigating your own relationships, understanding why groups behave the way they do, especially how subjective the enemy label can be, and how powerful that in-group, out-group pull is in our world today.
Yeah. And thinking about the report's title, The AI View, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? If you had a truly objective AI, no human emotions, no evolutionary baggage, how would it see this friend-enemy thing? Would it think it's necessary, a flaw, something totally different we can't even imagine? And, what could that tell us about ourselves and maybe about finding better ways forward? Definitely something to chew on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
This is DigitView.